Is somewhere in the southern regions of Iraq, not too far beyond the Kuwaiti border, where he's been on the move, as he described, for probably about 14 hours now. Good, morning to you. I guess it must be approaching afternoon there. Well, no, it's shortly after 10 o'clock in the morning, I believe, David. Tell me what is the latest from there. Describe the setting for us.
Well, Alice, I mean, we're out in the middle of the desert is basically the setting. What this is the lead element of the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division, which has about 20,000 soldiers in it. But we're with the 315 Infantry of the 2nd Brigade of the 3rd ID, which basically means these are the guys who were the first ones across the border into Iraq because, as I've said, their mission was to hit 2 observation posts, first with artillery, then with infantrymen, to make sure that they could not relay a message back to Baghdad as to where the 3rd ID would be rolling into southern Iraq from. Because obviously if they know where they're coming in from, they can anticipate what routes they might take, and this force obviously doesn't want them to do that. Right now we're stopped and basically waiting for the rest of the force to catch up with us, because obviously when you've got 6,000, 7,000 vehicles, 20,000 soldiers, it takes a long time to move them through those lanes into southern Iraq. So basically we're at a staging area here inside Iraq, where the rest of the force will then catch up with us, and then depending upon what's going on in Baghdad with Saddam Hussein and his possible injury or, maybe even death. We don't know what happened with him, but based upon what's happening on the ground, both in terms of Baghdad and in terms of the forces of the Republican Guard and the Special Republican Guard arrayed against them, then they'll make choices about how quickly they make a beeline for Baghdad.
David, how successful was that mission to clear the way? Was there any sort of significant encounters on behalf of those gentlemen there in the 3rd Infantry Division?
No, they've encountered only light opposition so far. What they were doing is they were hitting these 2 command posts, which each contained between 10 and 30 Iraqi soldiers. And, not to be glib about it, but I mean, from their perspective, they wiped them out. And they felt like they had to do that because, obviously, they don't want a message getting relayed back to Baghdad as to their whereabouts. So they hit it hard with artillery for the first half hour. We were told, we were listening on the military radio, that they started the bomb. We could see the pictures, and maybe you guys have those and maybe you don't. We could see the artillery strikes going off in the distance, and we were told that at 8:07, 7 minutes later, those 2 command posts were wiped out. When we finally got up to them after the infantry soldiers had been there as well, all we saw was smoldering remains of those 2 command posts. So as I say, they've encountered only light opposition thus far. We're also hearing reports that the 11th regular army division of the Iraqi army has capitulated, has surrendered, and that other Iraqi regular army divisions may be either contemplating or actively engaged in surrendering as well. If that's the case, and again, we don't know that definitively, we're hearing that over the military radio, but of course we're standing out here in the middle of the desert. But if that is the case, that's A, not surprising, because the regular Iraqi army was not seen as a formidable fighting force, but B, it's also good news because obviously it suggests that some component of the Iraqi military structure is surrendering to the U.S. forces, which is exactly what they'd hoped for.
David, might some of those come and surrender to your group there, the 3rd Infantry Division, because you have moved into Iraq right now, and the reports are that Iraq's 11th Division there is moving southern, so it would seem that your 2 forces might meet up. Was that to be expected?
It could be. Again, I don't want to say too much about where they are and where we might be, but the fact of the matter is that, and I tried in my discussion with Forrest Sawyer a little while earlier to sort of allude to this as cryptically as I could. There were entreaties made long before this conflict began to those regular Army commanders to say, look, here's a capitulation document that you can sign, and if you sign this capitulation document, you won't have to fight, you can surrender, you can put your men in garrison, you can put your vehicles in a square, you can be separated from them, and we won't engage in hostilities. In fact, you can be in charge of your men, and we'll disarm you, obviously, but they're going to leave a very light force behind and keep on rolling. But whether this particular element of the 3rd Infantry Division has been in contact with them as yet, I can't say.
David, do you know how long you expect to be stationary there as you wait for the other troops to come and join you?
Interesting that you should ask that question, because I think that we're going to get rolling here momentarily. We'll try to show you some live pictures of that as we're moving along, but I got to wrap this up pretty quick, so if you've got maybe one more question, and then we've got to get going.
All right, David, one thing, how safe do you feel right now there in the middle of the desert? I see nothing but sand in the picture that we're looking at with you there on the phone to hear my questions. I've seen a couple of tanks off in the distance a bit, but they are not in a large grouping. So do you feel like you could be any kind of a target, or are you just so lone and isolated that absolutely not?
Yeah, I think that right now we feel pretty alone and isolated. I mean, having said that, there's artillery that they could certainly rain down upon us, which is notoriously inaccurate but still deadly if by happenstance it happens to hit you. There's also the possibility that that artillery could be loaded with chemical munitions, biological agents, which is why we're in these chem suits, what they call MOP1, which means that you've got the chem pants on, you've got the chem top on, but you don't have your gas mask on, you don't have your boots on, you don't have your gloves on. So, I mean, it's certainly the case that there are potential threats out here. Having said that, we're comparatively safe. The fight that they anticipate fighting isn't here. It's much closer to Baghdad.
All right, NBC's David Bloom, you've said you have to get rolling there with the 3rd Infantry Division. We do appreciate your live report, David. Do stay safe, David, and we'll check. And good morning to all of you. It is 3 a.m. in the east. It is midnight, just past Pacific time. You're looking at a live picture being provided to us by the camera traveling with NBC's David Bloom. David is traveling with the 3rd Infantry Division. As you can well see, they are on the move. We can tell you they are in southern Iraq at this point, having been on the move for the better part of the last 14 hours or so. David Bloom was telling us earlier, as he spoke with us in our last hour, before being taken on the road, that their mission was successful. He was along with the troops that had gone in, those Marines, to secure the route through which the remainder of the 3rd Infantry Division would follow behind David and those Marines. What they had to do literally was, in David's words, not to be glib, he said, but they had to take out Iraqi posts there, of which there were anywhere from 10 to 30 or so Iraqi military units there in those posts. They were completely wiped out, destroyed. You can take from that what that would mean. They had to do that in order to keep those posts from reporting back to Baghdad or for their military operations central command that indeed the United States and coalition forces had passed through that way. They did encounter some mines that needed to be removed along the way as well. Again, this is with the 3rd Infantry Division, all Marines, as they have been progressing northwards towards Basra, we believe, but that is a very vast expanse of desert. They could be in any specific sort of geographical line from Kuwait up to Basra. We do not want to give away any sort of military information that might compromise the safety of the U.S.-led coalition and those troops, as well as our NBC News reporters. Once again, you're looking at live pictures coming into us. Imagine the technology now that we have to do this for you. These pictures being taken from the grouping within the 3rd Infantry Division. It is a mechanized unit. They have about 20,000 troops. Literally on the convoy that has been moving through the desert there. David, it's good to see you. Describe exactly what you're experiencing.
Talking right now, it's cutting in and out. Let me tell you what's going on here. I'm assuming that you can see and hear me. We're going along with the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division. We're right now in an M88, which is a tank recovery vehicle, which is our means of transportation as we move about on this potential battlefield. Now, you recall that we were with the lead elements of the 3rd Infantry Division, the 315 Infantry of the 2nd Brigade, the Spartan Brigade, as they were the first forces from the 3rd Infantry Division to cross last night into Iraq. Well, now we're in southern Iraq, and the convoy's hooked up. You'll recall that we said that there are 20,000 soldiers in the 3rd Infantry Division. They've got 250 tanks, literally thousands and thousands, 6,000, 7,000 vehicles. There's a huge dust storm that all these vehicles are kicking up, so it's very difficult to see much at all. But essentially what we're doing is we're rumbling along north in the general direction of Baghdad with the third ID. Now this is the heavily mechanized force, the iron fist they call it, of the U.S. Army. And so as we roll along here, you've got tanks and Bradleys and these M88s, which are the tank recovery vehicles. You've got medics, you've got fuel trucks, you've got an assortment of other vehicles. I want to have my photographer, if you can, pan out toward the left, Craig. Pan out toward about 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock. There you go. What you see right there is an old Iraqi tank from the first Persian Gulf War. What we're in right now is part of the war. Unexploded bombs, including cluster bombs, and a lot of basically leftover military hardware and the wreckage of the previous Gulf War. So it's very important that these vehicles stay on the road because there's unexploded ordnance as we're driving along here. But basically, as Craig just did a 360-degree pan there, you can essentially see that we're just out in the southern Iraqi desert, moving gently north toward Baghdad. Chris, I don't know if you can still hear me or not. I certainly probably cannot hear you.
David, it is Chris. Can you hear me now? David? Obviously, it is very loud out there. David is traveling on a tank recovery vehicle. David, can you hear me at all?
Chris, here's the thing. I can't hear you right now for a second. I'm going to have someone relay to me in my ear what you're asking. So go ahead and ask me something, and someone can relay it to my ear.
All right, David, that's great. I know that some of the troops who were there with you in the 3rd Infantry have been there for many, many months, and you and I talked about the fact that they were anxious to get going. How are they feeling now that they are actually on the move?
Okay, I'm told that what you asked was how are the troops feeling, given the fact that they've been here so long. How they feel is they're enthusiastic about this mission. You'll recall that the elements of the 3rd Infantry Division have been here in Kuwait, of course now in Iraq, for longer than any other forces in the Persian Gulf. Some of the elements of the 3rd ID have been in Kuwait since September or October, going on 6 months now. And
all right, we have lost David Bloom. In fact, it has never stopped striking any of us as extraordinary that we could get him at all. I think we have him back. Let's listen. All right, we have the picture, but we have no audio. Let me explain to you exactly what is going on in case you don't know. David is traveling with Iron Fist. That is the 3rd Infantry Division. Do we have that sound back? No audio. Okay. Part of this huge convoy, and you heard David as he described it, about 250 tanks, 7,000 vehicles. He is with the lead unit. Let's listen.
Their mission was to hit 2 Iraqi posts because what they wanted to do, frankly, was wipe those 2 observation posts.
And there we have lost him again. We're going to try and reestablish that, but obviously they are traveling through very barren, arid desert, and trying to continue to establish that signal is very difficult. But they were given specific orders last night to rest, and then they were brought on the move. Tremendous logistical challenge there in terms of food, water, other supplies, and of course fueling those huge tanks, which get, as you would not be surprised, I don't know, 6-7 miles per gallon, and they have to constantly refuel.
My family and her family are in Louisiana, and of course they have the same feelings, and they're just real anxious for us to get back home, get this over with and get home.
They're anxious for you to get home, and a lot of soldiers here that say that, Chris, they're anxious to get going. The sooner the 101st is mobilized across the border and get into their missions, they're not sitting ducks here, and that's what they're really hoping for. And as I mentioned before, Colonel Anderson, who runs the 2nd Brigade, was telling me this morning they were hoping that these alarms would end today, that as the mechanized infantry moved into Iraq that some of these mobile launchers that are moving around in the south would start to scatter and push north. It looks for the moment like they have not. There must be a few more operating down there and still threatening American forces here in Kuwait who are waiting to cross the border. Back to you.
If you could stay there, Dana, I just want to tell people what we're seeing in the other half of the screen from where you are. Can we put that back up, because that's David Bloom, or as we've been calling it, the Bloomobile. Actually, if we can hear some audio, my guess is that he may be doing, is he doing a live shot for someone else? Oh, David, this is Chris Jansen. Can you hear me?
Chris, I can barely hear you, but my sound man, Bob Lapp, can relay the questions if I don't hear you.
Just go ahead and tell us what you've been up to since we last talked about an hour ago. Just moving.
Well, we're basically just rolling along, Chris. I mean, as I told you the last time, the convoy's basically hooked up. This is the train, if you will, of the 3rd Infantry Division. 20,000 soldiers, 6,000 or 7,000 vehicles, and they're just rolling north from, obviously, when we crossed into Iraq last night. But keep in mind, we crossed into Iraq with the very lead elements of this division. So what happened was we essentially, as they say, grabbed a foothold, and then we let the rest of the division catch up with us, and now we're all sort of spread out on these, they're not roads. I mean, if my photographer can pan ahead here, Craig White, you can take a look. I mean, all we're doing is rumbling along on a desert where there's so many tracks of vehicles that have gone in front of us that there's sort of a makeshift road, if you will. And it's important, as I mentioned before, to stay on that makeshift road, because we're in an area where there was fighting in the first Persian Gulf War. Gulf 1, as some of the soldiers have taken to calling it, and they call this Gulf 2. At any rate, in Gulf 1, there's still unexploded ordnance here from U.S. airstrikes and other fighting that have gone on out here. For example, we've seen unexploded cluster bombs and other munitions. I mean, literally just a few feet away from us as we rumble along out here. So it's very important to sort of stick to this track and not veer off of the track.
David, in addition to the unexploded ordnances, what are the major concerns as you're on the move?
I think you're asking, Chris, what are the major concerns? And again, your questions are kind of being relayed to me. Well, I mean, the major concerns right now, once you get a big train of vehicles like this, is that you just keep the train moving. Because in a sense, you go at the rate of the slowest vehicles rather than the fastest vehicles. Obviously, the tanks and the Bradleys have the capability to whip out ahead of us. But in this case, that's not what they're doing. Instead, we're sort of all rumbling along together. And so you want to keep them fueled, and you do what they call hot refueling, where you just pause for a few minutes, quickly refuel, and keep going. They let the 2,500-gallon tankers catch up because they can go faster, and they have the 5,000-gallon tankers refuel them. As to the threat that they potentially face out here, keep in mind we're basically in the southern Iraqi desert, where there had been 3 regular Iraqi army divisions arrayed. We were told early this morning from the military radio that at least one of those Iraqi divisions had surrendered. They never expected to face any sort of heavy opposition in the south of the country. Instead, there are essentially 2 rings enveloping Baghdad, one with the Republican Guard, which has more heavily armed. They have the equivalent, perhaps not the technical expertise nor the outstanding equipment that the U.S. military has, but they have tanks, they have what they call their own version of APCs, which carry their infantry. Those divisions are more encircling Baghdad, one to the south, one to the north, sort of ringing Baghdad, and then the Special Republican Guard has sort of collapsed in and around Baghdad to fight there. So those are the targets that they're really after, rather than anything that's here in the south.
And will this move toward the capital be virtually nonstop?
Well, I heard my producers try to interrupt and tell me the question, but that one I could actually hear. unclear is the answer, because obviously what they're trying to do is assess what's gone on with the strategic bombing campaign, this shock and awe, as they call it. So they have different plans based upon, for example, if the Iraqi regime was about to collapse or had indeed collapsed, they could make more of a beeline toward Baghdad, especially if some of those more heavily armored units were giving up, were surrendering. The commanders here carry with them what they call capitulation documents, which would allow the Iraqi commanders to sign on the dotted line. And we're told some Iraqi commanders have already done that. Literally sign on the dotted line, and then that would allow them to keep their troops in garrison. I think that you may have seen the gun turret of Sergeant Joe Todd as he moved his gun around me here. He's one of the M88, if you will, soldiers here. There are two of them who are along here. We've got a gunner who's actually a tank commander, Sergeant Joe Todd, and we also have a driver up here whose name is Specialist or Private McLean, and the two of them are the ones who are driving us along as we rumble north with the rest of the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division.
How old are these guys, David, and have they ever been in any sort of a situation like this before?
Private McLean is a 20-year-old from Brooklyn, New York, and he has not been in combat before. He enlisted in the military just within the last 2 years or so. Sergeant Todd is a Persian Gulf War veteran and one of the guys who the people in this unit really look up to. Earlier, we were traveling with Sergeant Major Bob Gallagher, who, together with the commander of this task force, Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Twitty, are the two leaders. And sometimes Sergeant Major Gallagher rides in this vehicle. In fact, if you saw us a couple hours ago, he was right where I am now. This vehicle allows them to move around right up close to the battlefield if we were to engage Iraqi forces, rather than in the past commanders having to stay back further on the battlefield. Instead, with this armored vehicle, they can move up close with the tanks, with the Bradleys, and offer some close-up guidance to their forces that are engaged in a fight.
I'm not even sure how, with all that sand, you can see. Are you eating a lot of sand today, David?
Am I eating a lot of sand? Yes. The sunglasses are not a fashion statement. It's very, very sandy out here, as you can tell. And basically, when I turn around like this, I just swallow up the dust. It's actually clear right now. This is the first time that I turned around, and it's actually much clearer right now than it has been. With these vehicles, obviously, when you're talking about thousands of vehicles out in the desert, they out of sand, and so we definitely have a diet of MREs and fine Iraqi sand sort of mixed together.
Delicious. In the meantime, it is amazing to talk to you. How does this work?
Well, suffice it to say it works. How about if we just leave it at that? Basically what we've done is we've established the ability to transmit live from this vehicle using a pretty sophisticated camera, which can be outside the vehicle and take the bumps and the jars. And you may be getting a little bit of that. I frankly don't know how well the camera's working right now. Sometimes it works pretty well and sometimes it doesn't. But it took a lot of planning and a lot of effort on the part of a lot of people. But obviously, in the end, I think we benefit from it, and I hope that our viewers benefit from it, because it certainly is an unprecedented view of American ground troops as they prepare to engage in battle.
Extraordinary. And since it seems you're able to hear me, David, I should just say that this is by far the best transmission that we've had. You haven't been breaking up at all. We've been hearing you and seeing you very clearly, which is why we'd like to stay with it until we may lose it again, as we did the last time. You know, I was talking to your producer, Paul, just a little while ago, and we were talking about the extraordinary logistics being out in the desert and able to do what these troops are able to do. Talk a little about that, David, the logistics.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right, because in World War II, Rommel said, and this is a paraphrase, but Rommel, the great Panzer tank commander for the Germans, said that the war is decided before the first shot is fired by the quartermaster, meaning the people who supply the food, and especially for this unit, the fuel and the water and the mechanics, like Private McLean over here, they're the ones who make an army go. I mean, we tend to focus on the tanks and the Bradleys because obviously they're the ones that are actually engaged in battle. And as a matter of fact, when we get closer to those operations, you'll see a lot more of the Apache and the Longbow helicopters and the A-10s, the Warthogs, which fly close air supports on these ground missions. But the fact of the matter is, none of those things work without thousands of people, both here with us in this long train that is the 3rd Infantry Division, but also back in Kuwait, back in Qatar, back at air bases all over the Middle East, on aircraft carriers and other ships out in the Persian Gulf. A lot of those people that you don't see are the ones that give this effort the possibility to make tracks toward Baghdad as they are right now.
As we're watching you and knowing that we're able to establish this very sophisticated communication, Dana Lewis was saying at his location about one of the sergeants talking to his wife. Is there any communication between the troops there with their families back home? Do they have any way to talk to their families?
Right now they don't, because the situation, Chris, is that because this force was the lead element. I mean, they literally were the first boots in Baghdad, excuse me, the first boots in Iraq as far as a major armed contingent by the United States. Clearly there'd been special forces operating, clearly there'd been CIA agents operated, clearly there'd been maneuvers in the northern part of Iraq, which is Kurdish controlled. But as far as an army division, and the 3rd Infantry Division is the only army division that's here now in southern Iraq, before in Kuwait. As a result, they were on, I think it was Sunday, if I'm not mistaken, ordered to have no more emails, no more telephone calls, nothing whatsoever, because these soldiers obviously knew what the war plan was, and no one would intentionally convey that information. But as they say, loose lips sink ships, and they just wanted to make sure that nothing on the order of the battle plan was able to leak out.
And if nothing in the battle plan changes and these troops you're traveling with do put boots into Baghdad, they are going to need to be at their optimum. How are they trying to make sure that that happens in terms of food, in terms of sleep, in terms of keeping up the morale?
I wish I could find Sergeant Todd. Can you hand me one of those MREs? The MREs? Basically what we're eating are things like this. This is the chicken breast strips with chunky salsa, courtesy of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And basically what you do is you open these things up, and they contain a heating unit, which is actually this flameless heater right here. And what you do is you pop it inside this, pour a tiny little bit of water in, and that's how you stay nourished. As far as sleep, we had the advantage because we were the first unit to cross into Iraq, and we're with the 315 Infantry of the 2nd Brigade, which is the Spartan Brigade of the 3rd Infantry Division, and they were the first Army soldiers to move en masse into Iraq. But because what they did was establish a foothold and wait for the rest of the division to come along to join up with them so we could now have this train, we had a chance to get a few hours sleep. I have to tell you that sleeping in an M88 is not your luxury hotel by any means. It's little cramped quarters, but beggars can't be choosers, and we did catch a few hours of sleep. But what they do in a vehicle like this is, I mean, in this situation with just the two of them, with just Private McLean and Sergeant Todd, one's driving and one's manning the gun, and they're only sleeping when they stop. Otherwise, you're just going on adrenaline. But what Sergeant Todd does is he keeps a lookout. I mean, he's basically kind of scanning the sky and sweeping his gun around, looking for any opposition forces. Again, the only opposition that we've encountered was at the very first part of this mission when they hit the Iraqi observation posts. Their mission was to hit 2 Iraqi observation posts with between 10 to 30 Iraqi soldiers apiece. And I know I've said this before, but for people who haven't heard this, I mean, basically what they had to do was wipe out those observation posts because they didn't want word to get back to Baghdad as to the routes that this huge division was taking into Iraq, because obviously that's strategic information, which is why all we've been saying all along is we're in southern Iraq. We're not saying where we are. We're not saying how far we've traveled, because that information is obviously secure and not something that these commanders want to give out. But basically what they do is Private McLean drives us along, and you know, we move along in this vehicle and we try to keep up with the train that's in front of us. And obviously these vehicles move at different speeds, so sometimes you catch up a little bit, sometimes you fall behind a little bit. But if we drive for a couple days, you'll be driving for a couple days, and that's just what soldiers have to do in these circumstances.
Initially, when we established the picture, David, we did see along the route some abandoned tanks from the first Persian Gulf War. How much of that have you seen, and what else, if anything, have you seen besides desert?
I think what you're asking me about, Chris, is the Iraqi tanks that we saw out in the desert. And what that was this area was part of the area that was fought over when the this division in the first Gulf War, Gulf One as they say, was called the 24th Infantry Division. It's now the 3rd Infantry Division, but they were the ones who participated in the big left hook to sweep around and envelop the Iraqi forces and try to make a pincer move and trap them in. So this same area that we're traveling in right now was where there was combat, both in terms of aerial combat and in terms of ground combat. So that's a long way of answering your question. What we've seen are the T-72 Iraqi tanks and other Iraqi tanks. Most of the T-72s, which are the Soviet-made, most sophisticated tanks that the Iraqis had, were actually pulled back further into Iraq so that Saddam Hussein kept as many of those tanks as he could. The tanks with the lesser capabilities were actually the ones that were destroyed out in the desert for the most part, and those are the ones that we've seen. They're not littering the desert, if you will, but we see them from time to time. The biggest concern, as I mentioned before, is the unexploded munitions, because we literally have gone by cluster bombs that have just been a few feet away from our tracks. That's why I said before that it's very important that they stay on the road. It's not really a road, as you can see. I said before, it's just basically a gravel dirt path that they're traveling on. But you can see that this is a lot more hardened, and off to the sides, it's a lot more sand that's loose sand, where we've seen the unexploded munitions that they have to be very careful about.
This has been a pretty straight journey so far, but if and when you encounter Iraqis, David, what do you do? What does Paul, your producer, do? What does your cameraman do?
You know, if I could ask Paul Nasser to relay that question, because I didn't hear you, Chris. Paul? Well, okay, I heard your question now, Chris, and thank you, Bob Lapp, my sound man, for relaying that to me. We haven't encountered any Iraqi soldiers yet. I mean, we haven't personally. The infantry platoons did give chase to a couple of Iraqi soldiers who were trying to get away or engage them at those observation posts, and they took them out, if you will, in military parlance. But what they would like to do is have those soldiers surrender. As I've mentioned before, these soldiers are carrying with them what they call capitulation documents, which would basically allow the Iraqi commanders to sign on the dotted line and say, we're not going to engage the U.S. forces. We're going to surrender instead, and we're going to put our men back in their garrison without their weapons. We're going to put our military vehicles in a square with the gun turrets pointing inside so that they could not engage the American forces, and we're not going to fight you. That's what they would prefer to have happen, and that's what they believe is already happening with some of the regular Army divisions in the southern part of Iraq, who, keep in mind, those were the conscripts, not well paid, not well fed, not trained, well taken care of, who they did not expect to engage in any sort of vicious resistance. Now, having said that, concerns.
Well, for the first time after an extraordinary 20 or 25 minutes of watching David Bloom on the move in the Iraqi desert, we have lost the signal, but he has been with the 3rd Infantry Division. It is known as Iron Fist. We're talking about a huge number, 250 tanks, 7,000 vehicles. They were among the first on the move, crossing into Iraqi territory last night. What he is riding on is called a tank recovery vehicle. And you saw, as we have seen with our correspondents throughout, he has a 20-year-old who has never seen combat before. This is his first mission and getting a taste of what it's really like there in the Iraqi desert. And he also has with him a veteran of the Persian Gulf War. The one thing that they have encountered, at least immediately with David along the way, in fact, are a number of abandoned vehicles, abandoned tanks from the first Persian Gulf War. They were given specific orders to rest last night because it could be a very long several days, probably at least 2 or 3 days, as they move across the Iraqi desert. Their exact location, of course, not known, and heading, it is believed, if the war plan goes as expected, heading into Baghdad. They have tremendous logistical problems that are ahead of them, but so far they have been handling them very, very well. Now let's just get you caught up at 49 after the hour. Some of the things that have been happening so far today. There was the crash of one military helicopter. There were 4 Americans and 8